All right, welcome. So this is part three of our relationship series, and right now we're looking at the synastry of Meghan Markle and Prince Harry. So now we're taking the individual natal charts, and now that we've gotten through those, now we're going to look at them in comparison to each other. So the first chart we're starting with is going to be Meghan Markle, and how Prince Harry uh, it connects to her chart and operates in her sphere of influence and his impact on her. Then we're going to reverse it and we're going to look at Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's influence and impact on him. Okay, and so there will be a little crossover back and forth. So just kind of bear with me here while we go through this. All right, so Meghan Markle is the inside chart. Okay, now we are using a bi-wheel because this makes things a lot easier to look at. So in here, this is the natal chart of Meghan Markle. Okay, outside, right here, this is the chart of Prince Harry overlaid on top of hers. So we are using her houses and placing his planets where they would be respectively in her house. So this is Prince Harry and Meghan's house. Okay. So the first thing we're going to do when we look at relationship analysis or chart comparisons, and you guys do this all the time too, I'm sure you do, as we look at what the planets are doing in connection with each other, right? What aspects are the planets making across the charts? So the first thing we're going to look for always are tight aspects. The tighter, the better, right? So the things that we're not worried about are the generational planets. So like right here, Neptune is a generational planet. They're both got Neptune and Sagittarius and close together if they were born closer in years, which they are, 81 and 84. They weren't born that far apart. So naturally, Neptune is very close to each other in both charts. So we're going to ignore that. And it will be the same for Pluto, because Pluto, even though they're in different signs, they're still relatively close. Okay. So what do we have? So let's start with the sun. So Meghan Markle's sun is at 12 Leo. The sun is extremely important in the chart because the sun is our identity. It is who we are in the world. So what we're looking for are any planets that interact with her sun in a very close relationship or a very close degree. So the first thing we have, right, is a sextile to his Venus. We also have a lovely trine to his Mars and Uranus. Okay. So right here, this alone tells us that who Meghan Markle is and how she expresses herself is very compatible with the part of Harry's nature that's very excitable and adventure seeking. So that teenager quality that we discussed earlier about Meghan Markle fits and feeds right into Harry's love of adventure and travel and, again, freedom, all the things that go with being a teenager, right? Venus is also, remember, he's got a weakness for pretty faces. So his Venus is sextile her sun. And that Venus sextile sun is very nice because what that also means is the things that he likes and enjoys, his Venus, right, all his aesthetic likes, are very sympathetic or agreeable to the things she also enjoys, and also the things that she enjoys, okay, which, because it's Leo, luxury and indulgence, also fit in and are very sympathetic to his love of beautiful things. So luxury and beauty tend to go together. So in that respect, they share similar tastes and expressions. Okay, now here's something I thought was kind of interesting. His Harry Saturn, okay, is in a tight, exact square, ouch, to her sun. So one of the things that's going to happen is the way Meghan is going to experience this. So, because remember, we're looking at Meghan's chart now, right? So one of the things that's going to happen is Meghan is going to experience his Saturn, okay, in terms of how she expresses herself. The sun is self-expression. The first house is self-expression. The sun in the first house is all about me. Me, 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 me. How do I look? How do people see me? What do people think? Do I have an audience? Am I on display? Am I visible? Me, 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 me. Right? So in a performer, this is an excellent position to have because you have to be comfortable having an audience and you have to really feed off that energy of having an audience that has to really, energize you, to be able to be a performer, right? So first house suns are phenomenal with an audience because that feeds them. However, his Saturn squares that first house sun. So his Saturn in Scorpio is a very private placement. Remember, he's obsessively private. He does not like being out, in the front, in the world, on display. But she does. So her need to shine, to be visible, to be high profile, to be out there with an audience is going to cause some problems with his obsessive need to patrol the area and keep things very private, low key, and under the table. So they're going to constantly come in conflict with situations where he feels it's necessary that she go under the radar or make herself invisible, Saturn in Scorpio, and coming out of her fourth house, right? And her innate, the sun is your innate need, her innate need to be visible and in public and with an audience. So with his Saturn in Scorpio in her fourth house, these are all going to be domestic demands. He's going to have expectations of her as a domestic partner that have a lot to do with taking the back seat, being under the radar, being invisible, staying out of the limelight when, unless absolutely necessary, because Saturn in Scorpio does not like having it out there. Okay, so he's going to spend a lot of his time policing her behavior in what he sees as necessary for the sanctity of the home. Okay, this is going to conflict with her first house sun in Leo needs. And in many ways, she's going to feel very stifled, or like she's, the wilting on vine. So it reminds me a lot of the story about Marilyn Monroe with one of her husbands, who was very private and wanted her out of the limelight, wanted her to not be so Marilyn Monroe all the time because now she was married, so she should be devoting herself to home, hearth, and family, as a wife, which of course she couldn't do because she is a performer. She thrives on having an audience, and of course the marriage had all kinds of problems primarily because of that. I mean, other reasons too, but that was a huge factor in the breakup of that particular marriage. And that same conflict between the needs of a performer versus the demands of domestic duty and obligation are going to be huge problems in this relationship, because not only does it involve the Sun and Saturn, both of which are very, very intensely personal planets, it's also involving that fourth and that first house, which is the root, the home, the area that we go to for sustenance, nourishment, and regeneration, and identity, who we are, who we need to be. That's going to be interesting to see how that plays out, but that's definitely going to be a problem. I'm not even going to sugarcoat it. That's just going to be a problem, and that may be a breaking point or a deal breaker in this marriage as we move forward. So there's that. Okay. Now the second thing we're going to look at is her moon. Now remember, she's got a very very high profile moon in her chart because of the involvement with Saturn and Jupiter in the 7th house, and we just went over this in her chart. So let's see if he has anything that supports or challenges this moon Saturn Jupiter placement, right? So we're not seeing anything here. Venus is kind of wide, we're not using that. Pluto is kind of wide, we're not using that. Saturn, no. North Node, no. Uranus, but Uranus makes a sextile, which is good, right? We like the sextile. Let's go over here. So do we have anything over here? Nope, we've got nothing out here. Oh, but wait, what's this? Oh, okay, there's another red flag. So we'll start with the easy aspect first. I'm going to change color so we can see this better. So with this Uranus sextiling these Libra planets, this is a really nice aspect. It's a very pleasant aspect. We like this. And the reason we like this is this Uranus in her 5th house, okay, means that he's an exciting presence. He is an unexpected presence. He is a complete departure from what she's accustomed to. Well, you know, I mean, the obvious reason is that he's royalty. How often are we running around dating royalty, right? But it's also other things. So the very nature of who he is also presents things that are a departure from what she's typically used to. And given what we know about Harry's chart, you know, he's not a Hollywood personality. He's not a cardboard cutout prop. You know, he's a very real, very intense, very intense, very deep person who is not one to be trifled with at all. And he shoots straight from the hip. This is not somebody to play with. And given that she is a performer in Hollywood and who she's probably typically spending her time around, from the little bit that I know about Hollywood and LA personalities, you know, this is definitely a departure from what she's accustomed to. So the sextile means that it would be a nice flow. It would be easy for her to be around that with him. And it would help her grow, right? So this Uranus energy in sextile to these planets also gives her an opportunity to liberate Uranus herself from the chains of public opinion, because he certainly doesn't care about it. But this in and of itself is nice. This gives the relationship a nice spark or a friendly, fun, fresh quality. Okay. The problem is right here. All right, now remember, her moon is very, very high profile in her chart. It's extremely active, which means it's very critical that it has lots of supportive aspects, which it does not. The only thing we have for a supportive aspect between these two charts is literally his Uranus. That's it. There's nothing else close enough to that to act as a strong support with her moon. And the moon is her chart ruler, and you know, all the other stuff it's doing. So it does, however, have an extremely hard aspect. It has a square aspect to Jupiter and Neptune from his chart. So, two things. One, Jupiter in square, okay, to that Moon, Saturn, and Jupiter in her chart is going to make things challenging. So, on the one hand, it's going to increase or exaggerate her sense of confidence and her sense of esteem through relationship. The other is it's also going to raise her anxiety levels because Jupiter and Saturn tends to really, you know, stop, start sort of thing. And Jupiter tends to blow things up or exaggerate them greatly. So there's a tremendous, almost inflated is a really good word, inflated sense of elevation and status, because it's Saturn and Jupiter, and optimism because it's moon, that goes with the Jupiter aspect, just Jupiter alone, okay? Neptune, now if you look, Neptune's at 28, so it's actually late and not quite into Capricorn. However, it is still within a square aspect, because even though it's in a different sign, those late degrees makes it just close enough to reach that moon and Saturn and Jupiter. And what I would do, because we're looking at 5, so we're looking at 6 degrees, I wouldn't necessarily use that Neptune with Saturn and Jupiter. I would definitely, though, use it with the moon, because the moon has a wider orb, right? So with Neptune, get rid of all these markings. So with Neptune squaring the moon, that lends itself to its own special kind of problems, okay? So his Neptune in her 6th house, all right, squaring her moon in her 3rd house, this can be a very confusing placement. So Neptune in the 6th house can be disruptive to people's routines. So he is definitely going to, in his own way, be very disruptive to a routine. Not only because it's sitting in her 6th house, but also because it is squaring her moon and her 3rd house, which all of these things have to do with her daily routines. So he is going to be erosive, which means to kind of wear or like water pulling sand off a beach, very gradually erosive to her normal routines. And she may even find it difficult to keep a routine around him for whatever reason. So that would be interesting. The other thing is that it tends to be, I wouldn't call it deceptive, but there's a lot of miscommunication when you have a Moon Neptune square like this. So there's an inability to read each other that comes up with this. Moon squaring Neptune tends to not see the Neptune person clearly. So she's having all this Jupiter square, Moon, Saturn, Jupiter stuff going on from his chart, but Neptune is right there. So she is seeing a lot more here than may actually be there. So she may be ascribing qualities to this relationship, or what her life is going to look like, or what they can do together, that is well beyond, because Neptune exaggerates and so does Jupiter, that is well beyond what's actually going to happen, at least in terms of what her imagination and optimism wants to believe. So that's a huge problem right there. I'm not loving this at all. Right there. That's going to be an issue. All right. So now we're going to look at some other stuff in terms of her chart. So let's look at that. Remember, her Mars is very dysfunctional, right? It's not healthy, not healthy at all. So let's see if Mars receives any supportive or good aspects. Okay. And so far, not really. Well, yes. So her Mars, let me change colors. Her Mars receives an almost exact trine from his Saturn. So one of the beautiful things about this, because Saturn, again, is one of those deeply personal planets in the chart, is one, that Saturn in Scorpio can see right through that Mars in Cancer in the 12th house crap. So he sees right through her. So he will call her on her crap every single time, which is good because she needs that. The biggest challenge she has is being honest with herself, remember? The other thing is that with a Mars-Saturn trine like this, she can always count on him to have her back no matter how bad things get. And with Mars in the 12th house, separate from Mars in Cancer, but just Mars in the 12th house, there's always a feeling of vulnerability and never really being sure where the boundaries are, or even having defenses. Because it's a Pisces house. Pisces has no defenses. So they were literally like jellyfish, kind of splayed out and open without any real way to defend themselves once they're out of the water. So with Saturn there, Saturn gives some protection and support and a lot of reinforcement to that weak Mars. So in Harry, she can definitely count on him to be a friend, like a real friend that's always going to be there for her in a pinch, and literally when the final count is in. His Saturn falls in her 4th house, so this has everything to do with his ability to be a real family member, which for whatever reason may be something that she did not have or did not feel like she had before him, in any meaningful sense of the word, separate from her parents. So he is going to be the strong, supportive family member that she would not psychologically have otherwise, or at least that's the way she'll experience him. Okay, so let's get rid of this. All right, so now what else do we have going on? Mercury is very important in a chart because your Mercury is how you communicate with each other, and strong Mercury ties are very important in order for you to be able to have conversations. And you got to have conversations because, listen, kids, at the end of the day, when all is said and done and nothing else is working, you'll have 2 pleasures left in your relationship with your partner. One is the pleasure of breaking bread with each other. So you better enjoy the same kinds of foods. And 2, the other pleasure that you're going to have left when everything else goes away is the pleasure of conversation. So you better like talking to each other. So we look at Mercury in these charts. How well do they communicate? How easily do they communicate? And is there any pleasure or joy in it? So her Mercury is in the 1st house in Leo. She loves talking about herself. Many of us do, but her maybe more so than the rest of us. It is at 5 Leo. The closest aspect we have is at trine Uranus. And it's kind of wide to Saturn and Pluto. And we can kind of use that. We'll get back to it. And here we have a semi-sextile. Okay. So we'll start here. So with Mercury making a semi-sextile to the other Mercury, right, between the two charts. Semi-sextiles are weak aspects. They're positive aspects, but they're weak aspects. So there's a sense of sympathy or camaraderie, but not a really strong thing. So they might talk to each other, but they don't necessarily get a lot of pleasure out of talking with each other. It's a kind of a weird thing, right? So they're comfortable. That's the way to look at it. They're comfortable talking to each other. But there's nothing particularly life-changing about their communications with each other. So over time, this will dissipate as they become more comfortable with each other and become more familiar. This will dissipate and kind of calm down into a, just being comfortable speaking with each other. Now, what they also carry. See, and here's where some of the excitement and pleasure comes from. So they're also carrying a Mercury-Uranus trine. So his Uranus in her 5th house trines that 1st house Mercury. So Uranus and Mercury love working together, okay? Because Uranus is the higher octave of Mercury. So he is inspirational to her in many, many ways. So that Uranus trining Mercury means that he is a wellspring of energy and inspiration and new ideas and fresh ways of looking at things and exciting changes of perspective. He opens her world, which is phenomenal because the 1st house Mercury tends to be so self-absorbed they don't really pay attention to what else is going on. No offense, Mercury and 1st house people, but anytime something is reflected back on itself, it becomes a self-contained unit, which means it doesn't allow a lot of room for fresh air and fresh perspectives. This is why we like talking to other people, because they bring to us things from the world around us that we didn't necessarily see because we were so busy gazing at ourselves and trying to figure out how we can make ourselves better. So, well, some of us spend time thinking about how to make ourselves better. Other people just spend time thinking about ourselves. So that Mercury-Uranus trine is nice. There's always a fresh, piquant sort of quality to the thing. And also with that Uranus poking her Mercury, he likes to prod her out of her stagnation. So he will never leave her, because of his nature, he will never leave her in a position to kind of keep tilling the same fields over and over and over again. He's always going to stimulate her to see things differently, to think about things differently, to expand and broaden her vision. And challenge. Uranus loves to challenge the status quo. So his Uranus is always going to challenge her on things that she thought she was believed or thought she was committed to, or things she's absolutely firm on. And the more, because Mercury in Leo is a fixed position, the more she digs her heels in and gets stubborn about this is absolutely the one way, and this is right and everybody else is wrong, the more she digs in and tries to hold firmly to an opinion or a view or something like that, the more that Uranus of his gets activated and comes along and challenges everything and says, yeah, you really think so? Well, let's take a look at that. So it's Uranus and Mercury is a great combination to have in this type of aspect when you have to do collaborative projects with people, because the Uranus person will always keep you on your toes, and the Mercury person is always able to process what you're trying to say and bring it down to earth for the lay person, because Uranians and Aquarians in this case tend to be so far ahead of themselves that they have difficulty articulating what they're seeing, because they tend to leave out a bunch of steps between here and where they're at. Okay, now let's take a look at these little guys right here. All right, so Mercury is at 5, give it a 4-degree orb. Saturn is still kind of wide, but Saturn's very important in this chart because it's almost angular. Pluto is much closer to that Mercury, but they're still kind of wide. So Mercury sort of falls right here in the midpoint between these two planets, okay? So we're going to look at it that way. So if Mercury falls at the midpoint of his Saturn-Pluto, right, and this is a square aspect, one of the things that we can expect, this is not a great position to have, because one of the things we can expect is that Mercury, something about her and her self-absorption, or her focus on herself, or the way she communicates about herself, or it's literally, because it's the first house, it's all about her. And it's Leo, which is very, I hate to say it, but they're performers, they're very self-absorbed. So this Mercury and Leo thing for her is really going to hit a sensitive spot for him, and this is going to be the source of some real problems between them. And she could very seriously wound him in this way. So I'm not completely sure what that's about. And I really don't think I want to find out, because I like these two characters a lot, and I hate to see anything bad happen. So, in situations like this, some of the things we would look at is, well, what does Mercury rule? What areas of her life could possibly get pulled in that are going to, that could have such a straight line right into like the most vulnerable parts of him, deep in his psyche, because it's the midpoint of Saturn and Pluto, right? So Mercury rules that 12th house, which is things hidden behind the scenes and secrets in the past. Mercury also rules that 5th house, which is love affairs. And, remember we talked about her difficulty with partners, right? And, her tendency to be very abrupt with her affections, on then off then done, right? So that could be a source of serious hurt between these two, and he would be the one being wounded, she would be the one wounding. The other thing that this could possibly be, because it is the 5th house and it's the 12th for her, this could absolutely be something to do with childbirth and pregnancy. So there may be issues with pregnancy and children for her in this relationship with him that cause tremendous amount of deep wounding or pain for him. I mean, certainly if there's children involved, it's going to hurt her too. But whatever this is, this really strikes at the core of him. And this is not a happy thing. So I'm hoping that this turns out to be something, as awful as it is, I'm hoping this turns out to be something fated, like congenital birth defects or inability to have kids or something like that, as opposed to, romantic betrayals or something like that because of her exes, or let's hope that's not it. But whatever this is, it's not happy. I don't like that aspect. And normally in people where this is not, in anybody else, this would not be as big a deal and it wouldn't be prominent. The difference is, this is her 1st house Mercury. It's very in your face, present, immediate, right now, like walking into a wall, kind of bang, right there in your face. And it's a Saturn-Pluto midpoint for him, and Saturn, we know, sits at the top of his chart, and Saturn is always where it hurts the deepest. So, and it's coming out of her 4th house, which is the end of the matter, right? And the home, the most vulnerable part of our chart. So in this particular case, because of these other considerations, this is a very important factor, and I don't know what that's about. I don't want to speculate too much, because it's all, there's no good speculation for this. So we're gonna leave that there. We're gonna leave that there. Okay. All right, so now looking at all this, like, okay, well, we got a little bit of excitement, but like, so where's the beef? Like, where's the good stuff? What is compelling them to get married? Like, this is pretty big stuff, right? You don't marry somebody you're having a fling with. So there have to be other things that make this relationship easy or promising between them, okay? So now we're going to look at Jupiter, right? Jupiter, the great benefic, because Jupiter is wonderful and can forgive just about anything, right? So remember, now we've already covered Jupiter with all of this. One of the other things, and that's his Jupiter. So her Jupiter is here at 6 Libra. And I don't really see anything going to his chart. So this is all perceived benefits from him to her, as opposed to the other way around. So that we're going to get into when we do his chart. One of the things that we do see is right here. So his Mercury is kind of close to her Venus, but not really close enough. Some astrologers will use it, but I think those are just way wide orbs, and I'm not feeling that they're close enough to make that much of an impact. However, his part of fortune is conjunct her Venus. So there is tremendous material benefit for her. And also in terms of what is it, the contacts and networks and people, and there's a lot of benefit to her from him. So with his Jupiter squaring all those Libra planets and that part of fortune on her Venus in that third house, she's receiving a lot of benefit from this relationship. So there's a lot of reward for her to play the game correctly, and to be who he wants her to be, as it were. So, and of course, still, we're right back to this thing. Well, okay, but like, how is this different from every other woman he's dated? Like, hello, right? Because there has to be more, right? That's still not enough. Like, nobody can keep this up forever, right? So there still has to be more, and it's in the other charts. So let's also look. His Venus is conjunct her Pluto, and again, these are wide orbs, but we're going to take it mostly because it's Venus and Pluto, and also too, we're going to use that wide orb with her Mars, right? So this particular combination, her Mars Pluto, right, all involving his Venus, what this does is, remember, many of our decisions when we're young are driven by our gonads, whether we like it or not. Nature rules. Nature makes the first decision. So when you have a Venus-Mars square like this tends to create a very hypersexual relationship, lots of instant attraction or aversion, sometimes both. So literally, running hot and cold between them is not unthinkable. So what turned out to be a hot attraction at the beginning could turn into a very cold aversion very quickly later on. So it will be interesting to see how that plays out. And what that does to the relationship. Again, Harry likes to run and get his legs stretched. I don't think Harry's getting everything he really needs from her because she's not wired that way. But that's a whole other conversation. Venus and Pluto together will make an almost obsessive kind of attraction. Pluto contacts are very difficult between charts because they don't make us rational. This can be good, this can be bad. In all cases, it's always problematic, especially when you decide you want out of the relationship, because Pluto will not let you go. So with Venus and Pluto here, okay, wide conjunction, I would still use it in this case. I would still use it because it's also sextiling Neptune, right? And it's squaring Mars. So Venus with that Pluto tends to make this an almost compulsive attraction to each other. It's like they just couldn't resist, sort of thing. Very intense, very sexual. There's a lot of deep biological drive behind this. It's literally driving this train. With Venus sextiling that Neptune, his Venus sextiling her Neptune, he also feeds into her fantasy life, or what she imagines that life with him is going to be like, because her Neptune's in the 5th house. She's a romantic. So his Venus in Libra, which loves beauty and the social graces and all social charms, he knows exactly how to romance her, in ways that for her work very, very well. So there's that. So far, we're not seeing, other than intense biological urge, we're not really seeing, I'm not seeing enough here for this to hold a relationship together over the long term. But there are other things at play, and people get married for all sorts of reasons that have nothing to do with the mythical soulmates. Ugh, soulmates. Marriage is a practical decision. There are many, many reasons people get married, up to, above, and beyond being in love with somebody, or what they think is in love with somebody. So don't get too hung up on semantics here. All right. So now let's look at Prince Harry's chart and how Meghan Markle is interacting with his chart. Right. So these will be the same aspects because it's the same charts, but now the houses are different. So one of the things that we see is that Meghan Markle fills up the top half of his chart, right? So right there, we know that this relationship with her, she is a very visible player in his life, and she's very much about what's on display. So when people see them together, it's very much about how she looks on his arm, which, given his Saturn at the top of the chart, may be a little challenging. And just so you guys know, this is the midheaven. So the charts turn a little bit, right? So this is still the ascendant, but this right here is the midheaven. Okay, and his chart is right here on the inside. All right. Okay, so let's get down to it. So again, first thing, we're looking at his sun. His sun is at 22 Virgo. Is his sun receiving any aspects from her chart? Well, looky here. All right, let me get this pen. Neptune in her chart squaring his sun in the 8th. So her Neptune sits in his 11th house. His sun in the 8th house is taking a square from that Neptune. So what this means, and the 8th house is the house of deep psychosexual bonding, as among many other things. So with this particular square, he has a very hard time seeing her for who she is, mostly because he's driven by these compulsive 8th house drives, right? So that sun in the 8th house wants what it wants, and it goes by pure gut instinct. The problem is with Neptune involved, the gut instinct is not as accurate as it normally is, because Neptune tends to muddy the waters, as it were. So she short circuits his normal ability to cut to the heart of the matter. There's a lot she sits in his blind spot. With Neptune in hard aspect to the sun, the Neptune person sits in the sun's blind spot. So she sits in his blind spot. There's a lot he's just not going to see about her now or maybe ever. Hard to say how that's going to play out. That sun at 22 Virgo is also, again, sextile her Uranus. Okay, so there's a couple of things. Uranus in his chart is in the 10th. Her Uranus is in his 10th house, so it's a kind of a wake up, shocking, sort of completely unconventional, unexpected, off the beaten path sort of presence in his life. Obviously, because that's exactly what's been happening since they've gotten together. She is absolutely the completely unconventional, unexpected paramour for the prince, especially given his history, right? And in sextile to that 8th house sun, she provides enough taboo, excitement, and appeal that his 8th house sun finds that attractive. Okay, because remember, the 8th house is very much about shattering conventions. It's almost Uranian, but it's more than that. It's very much about going against conventions and doing what feels right to get. That Uranus and Scorpio loves pushing boundaries and pushing the boundaries of convention in its own way. So the two together, they enjoy that about the relationship that they have with each other, that it pushes boundaries or tests boundaries and pushes social convention. In what they would see, because it's the 8th house and it's Uranus, in what they would see as a socially progressive way. So what else do we have here? Well, her Pluto is semi-sextile the sun. I wouldn't really use that because it's kind of wide and not very interesting. And that's pretty much it. We're not seeing a whole lot else here with his sun or his identity, except, Neptune, which has her in his blind spot, and Uranus, which totally feeds into that 8th house desire to kind of, challenge people, right? So in many ways, she may be his rebellion against, what he sees as, history, his rebellion against history, and, blazing a path for a new world order. Well, not new world order, I don't like the connotations for that, but, a whole new way of doing things in life. All right. So his moon, which we know in his chart is extremely important. We had a long talk about his moon. So his moon here at 21 Taurus, and moon also is how we relate to people on an emotional level in our day-to-day routines and the things that bring comfort. We need to have good, strong moon connections to something in somebody's chart for a relationship to be successful and to be comfortable. Okay, without the strong moon connections, it's very hard to make a relationship stick. Okay. So, what do we have? Do we have anything? Well, so we've got a wide square to the sun, which I may or may not use. You can use it because it's the sun and the moon. But this is problematic, that moon squaring sun. And again, it's right back to this business about, her identity versus what he expects and needs from a partner at home. And look at this. Let me do this in a different color. his moon in the fourth house, squaring her sun in the seventh. So literally, her participation in his life as a partner will conflict and certainly challenge all of his needs from her as the woman in his life and the mother of his children. So this, her natural first house Leo stuff sitting in his seventh house is going to make it very, very challenging for them to maintain this relationship over the long term, because what she needs to be herself is not going to jive with what he needs from home, hearth, family, and wife. Okay, especially if they have kids. Oh dear Lord. Right? Okay, so back to the moon. So his moon again is at 21 Taurus. Is it doing anything else? Well, it's making a quincunx to Pluto and another quincunx to Neptune. So he's got a yod with her Neptune Pluto. And it will be coming out of his ninth and his 11th. And that's his fourth. So I'm not completely sure. I'm not completely sure that how this is going to work. And the reason I say that is this. We know that Neptune and Pluto in her chart is not very significant. These are really downgraded planets because they don't do much in her chart. However, Harry, this is prime astrological real estate. That moon in the fourth house is a very big deal for him, okay? And taking the quincunx, or making a yod, right, to her Neptune and Pluto means that her Neptune and Pluto, which are minor players in her consciousness or her existence, are huge players in his personal life at a very, very deep level. Now, coming out of his 11th and his 9th, this has a lot to do, 9th has a lot to do with foreign countries and travel and things at a distance. She is from a distance, but this is more than that. With Pluto in the 9th, this has a lot to do with diplomacy and politics and other countries other than their own. So this would not be, there's something about her in relationship to him that's going to impact the family, because it's the moon in the fourth, okay? And it's also going to impact his daily routines, his relationships. With Neptune in the 11th, again, because she sits in his blind spot, the 11th has a lot to do with large groups and organizations. And Neptune has to do with charitable work. So it could be that any charitable work that she does with large groups or organizations could have a significant impact right here on his family. There could be something that's going on with her that's such a minor thing in her life compared to everything else that she needs for her personal evolution. These things are not necessary for her personal evolution. These are things that she would just be doing because it's just there. It could be that these things have direct impact or pull in accidentally or by fate his entire family, and the foundations upon which he rests. So if she is involved in any type of socio-political or charitable organizations or groups, this could have a much more far-reaching effect on his home and his family than anybody realizes right now. And whether it is good or bad is a moot point, actually, because when a yod is involved, there is fate. It's a timer, right? So a yod is also known as the finger of God. Or, as I like to call it, the world's biggest catch-22. So typically what I see a lot of with yods, right, is just this ridiculous catch-22 all the time. And unfortunately, it's a fated one that you can't really get out of. So there is something that either he needs to deal with, or the royal family needs to deal with, or the country of England needs to deal with, because these are all fourth house, Scorus, moon stuff, right, that are going to be triggered by her association or participation in charitable organizations or charitable works with large groups of people in foreign countries. So I don't know what that is, but it will be interesting to see what this is about, because this is apparently fated, and this she is a vehicle to set this into motion. So we'll see. We will see. Okay. All right. Now, what else on the moon? Do we have anything else on the moon? We have almost nothing. So the other thing, the final aspect that we have to his moon is her Uranus. Okay. Now remember, we talked about Uranus when when we were doing her chart and putting his planet in her chart, right? But now we're going to talk about her Uranus as it affects him. So with a Moon Uranus opposition, this is not a good augury for a long-term relationship, and this is why. Uranus is extremely excitable. It's very abrupt. It runs hot and cold like a light switch, literally on off like a light switch. And it's very erratic. It's very difficult to control. And more than that, it does not like routine. It needs stimulation. It needs freedom. It needs air. Okay, lots of breathing room, and it needs space. It's not interested in convention and being bridled and stifled and held to rules and standards that other people think are important for it. It makes its own rules and blazes its own path that's going through life. Care less what other people think. All right. Now, Uranus is not strong in her chart. All right. Because remember, this is her chart, and her Uranus is over here in the 5th house. So there's nothing particularly active and ever present about Uranus in her chart. However, okay, Uranus is in that 5th house of children and relationships or flings. Her Uranus in her natal chart of children and flings opposes that moon in the 4th house. And it's coming out of his 10th. So one of the things that I would look for is, remember we talked about she's going to have problems with exes, and God forbid she's ever slept with anybody that she's worked with, because all these people have no sense of integrity when it comes to spilling her secrets. This could easily be scandal with Moon Uranus. That Uranus and Scorpio of hers in the 10th of his could be a public scandal involving a relationship, or in her case, more likely a fling. Okay, a relationship or a fling that is definitely going to impact his sense of security and safety and trust and confidence, not just in women, but also in her. So this is definitely going to rock the family, as it were, and it's going to make it extremely difficult. The other thing is a Moon-Uranus opposition. While Uranus is not necessarily very active in her chart alone, when his planets come along and activate that, it makes that Uranus much more, it brings it to the surface more, at least in the context of that relationship. So that excitable, easily bored, constantly seeking stimulation and attention and challenges, and that Uranus and Scorpio energy that normally would be driven into her creative work, her acting, her flings, her relationships, her artistic endeavors. In this particular case, now it's going to be on full high profile view in the 10th house of career and public standing. So it may be that all this contrary Uranus and Scorpio energy may find itself in a very uncomfortable home and position in a very public way that draws more attention to him and them, this relationship, and their personal life. So one of the big challenges also, aside from the possibility that there's some type of scandal or like her past coming to light that really kind of rocks the house, there's also the possibility that there's something about the things that she does creatively or as a means of self-expression or just at a pure innocent whatever, just to be playful, kind of thing. People will zero in on the oddities about her wherever they can find them, and that will cast a spotlight and question about the nature of their home life. So there's that. The other thing with Moon Uranus oppositions like this is there's a lot of separation. So there is the possibility that this relationship will have many periods where they will not physically be together. So there'll be breaks in a relationship, and also the possibility that she could often, in a tantrum or in a fit of independence or whatever, that because remember Uranus and Scorpio, while not active, really active in her chart, now really gets activated in this relationship and comes to the full board to the front. With Uranus and Scorpio, please step forward. It could be that Uranus and Scorpio now really starts exercising its presence in the context of this relationship, and this rebellious, well, to hell with you, I don't need you, I can do it on my own, I'd rather be by myself. All that defiant Uranus and Scorpio energy may come to the forefront, in acts of trying to separate herself or establish her independence from home and family associated with this relationship, which with a moon and Taurus in the fourth house is absolutely the worst thing you can possibly do, because that is everything to him. So threatening abandonment, threatening separation, threatening breaks, threatening anything that challenges the sanctity and security and safety of a private home life is an absolute no-no with him. And you'll only get one chance and then you're done. So I don't know how they're going to avoid this, because this is the nature of these planets. So I'm not liking how this is going. I'm not liking the possibilities it presents. It will be extremely challenging for them to maintain a solid home life in the presence of this, because his moon, that very, very, very highlighted important moon in his chart, is not receiving any other solid aspects from her chart. There's nothing else in her chart that is supporting this. The closest thing to a positive aspect supporting his moon, okay, is her Venus, and even then it's wide. It's a wide trine, which just means that with Venus and moon in trine like this, even though it's wide, they have a similar sense of aesthetics. So they are able to cohabitate because their sense of style and comfort and decor and routines are sympathetic to each other, and that's literally the only supportive aspect I can find between the charts. So I am not okay with this. The other things, if we're going to use wide orbs, if we're going to go as far out as 13 for that Virgo, we're going to go out as far out as 12 for the Saturn. Oh, no, it's his Saturn. Sorry, excuse me. We got rid of that. Okay. Yeah, so I'm not digging this. I'm not digging this. So we're looking at this, and we're going to wrap up this section, and well, there has to be something, good Lord, we're getting married, for God's sakes, right? So now this is where we start getting the composites, and we're gonna end this here and then pick up composites in the next video, because this video is getting a little long. All right, so in a composite chart, there's a couple different ways you can set up a composite chart. I use the Davis method because it just works better for me, but you'll find that there are certain themes that run consistently through them. So when you look at a composite, we're going to get into the next video, but here's what I will say. With a composite chart, the things that are jumping out in this chart between Meghan Markle and Prince Harry, right here, look at this. A Venus-Mars conjunction, okay? And we've got a Saturn-Pluto conjunction, right? And we've got a Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. And, well, that's it to start. So I'm going to leave this video here, and then the next video we're going to cover the composites, okay? So here's the thing. Remember when I told you that nature trumps everything. Nature has and biology have their own ideas about what's necessary for the survival of the species, and it has nothing to do with what's going to make you happy. Ask anybody who's ever thought they were in love with somebody, got married, had kids, or had kids and got married, or had kids and didn't get married, and then realized years later, what on earth was I thinking, right? Yeah. Nature and biology do not care what you like. It only knows what it needs to propagate the race. We have a Venus-Mars conjunction. Now, they're out of sign. We're not worried about the sign placements in a composite, but we definitely have a Venus-Mars conjunction, and Venus-Mars conjunction is hot sex all the time. There's a tremendous amount of natural animal attraction between these two. The sex would be phenomenal, enough to make them stupid. Sex is great. Let's get married. And also, if we use the houses on a composite chart, they're following the 12th house. So there's a lot more going on behind the scenes than may be visible. So there may be some interesting expressions behind closed doors on one part, the other part, or both our parts that also lends into this feeling of we were meant for each other. So, sidebar, kids, especially to you guys out there, listen, I know for some of you, sex is extremely important, and sexual compatibility in your mind is the most important thing ever, especially if you've been married to somebody that you're not sexually compatible with, and you're in a monogamous relationship that does not allow you to do anything else except your partner. I get it. I get it. But just so you know, sexual compatibility is not the definition of a good relationship. And as adults, in theory, academically, we should know this, but oftentimes we don't seem to practice this. Sexual compatibility is just that. It's just sexual compatibility. It's this thing that you do that feels good when you bump uglies and you're having a hot time. It does not mean you can get along together. It does not mean that you can build a life together. And remember, when you're talking about marriage and relationships, we're talking about Team Us. This is literally a partnership that is designed to help us both survive and get through life and at best thrive as a result of teaming up with each other. That has nothing to do with sex. Trust me. All the people we've ever been with that we have had intimate relationships with in our youth, and we look back and we're like, oh dear God, thank God I didn't marry them. You know, one thing has nothing to do with the other. So, but we also know that, you know, really strong biological attraction can make stupid and think that like all sorts of things are working that aren't really, right? Oh, we can live on love. No, you can't. No, you cannot, Junior. You cannot. So this appears to be right off the bat, bang, first thing we're saying, this appears to be a huge factor in the pull, the magnetic ground shaking pull between these two across, you know, class lines, social lines, you know, party lines, ocean lines, timelines. Yeah, so, you know, nature and biology, man, that's some powerful stuff. Okay, so we're going to leave this here. And we're going to, in our next video, we're going to delve more deeply into the composite chart. And then we're going to look at the composite to the nails. So you didn't know there was this much work, right? What is it? Comparing charts. Relationship analysis, a lot of work. All right. Okay, kids, we're going to end this here, and we'll see you next video.